We often think of mentors as wise sages that are always sharing their wisdom. But if this wasn't always the case, can you be guided by someone who holds their wisdom close and doesn't want to share? Rick will share with us how a mentor of this type rarely was helpful, but unwittingly helped him to learn valuable lessons that he uses to this day. So let's welcome Rick with his speech titled Common Folk, Helping Guide Common Folk. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Mr. Toastmasters, fellow Toastmasters. Katya, thank you for being here. Maya Angelou mentored Oprah Winfrey. Steve Jobs mentored Mark Zuckerberg. And Professor Dumbledore, well, he mentored Harry Potter. There's lots of famous mentors out there, lots of famous proteges. I'm not one of those. Probably never will be one of those. But I did have many mentors along the way. And I do want to tell you about one in particular. His name is Jim Bett. I had known Jim for a couple of years when I was placed with him at work, ostensibly to learn the technical aspects of a very complicated piece of machinery. You see, Jim liked to keep all of his information to himself. I'll explain why here in just a minute. I said ostensibly because, in point of fact, I learned a lot more about people than I did about machinery. Jim served his country in the Navy, where he learned valuable skills that allowed him to become a maintenance team member when he got out of the service. He'd been a maintenance team member for several years when he and I finally met. As I mentioned, Jim is very, very smart, didn't like to give his information out. I was put with him just so I could get some information so that when he retired, which was coming up, that we'd be able to carry on. Well, the reason behind Jim not wanting to give up information was complicated. You see, Jim one time was openly disparaged by his management in front of the whole group, and he never got over it. And another thing he didn't get over it was the fact that the group didn't stand up for him. So now he has the same manager and the same group. He doesn't like anybody there. But this caused him to be spiteful and acerbic to a lot of people. And the reason they put me with Jim wasn't just because I was capable and know how to do things. They knew I was good at getting along with people. I'd been with the company for a few years, and Steve had 20 years on me. He was about 55, which put me at about 35, a full-grown man. But I was still smarting from being fired from a job several years before. The thing that hurt me most about being fired from my job was being fired was my fault. They told me when I was being terminated that I wasn't a team player. I didn't play well with others, and that I didn't give information out like I should. Sound familiar? It's Jim Bett. I was going down the same path that Jim Bett is on now. I changed my ways, but at that point, I just hadn't quite figured out what way my ways were going to change. So we started working together. And after a week or so, Jim was welding some things together. I'm a welder, I know how to weld, and I'm good at it. He didn't know that. Well, he lays out this piece of equipment that he'd been welding on. I looked at it, I said, Jim, you did a good job on that. I like your technique. I'm going to try to figure out how you did that. He pulled his welding helmet up, looked me square in the eyes, and just walked off. Classic Jim Beck. That's just the way he was. Well, a few weeks later, Jim was working on a complicated piece of machinery that used a lot of computers. And he had written some code to try to capture some faults that were happening in the machine. It was break time. He had to go to break. I went in and sat in for him. I looked at the code he had written. I'm a pretty capable code writer myself. I looked down through there and figured out everything that his code did. When he came back, I looked at him and said, Jim, I like your code. It's simple, it's elegant, and it looks really good. He pointed right at me and he said, tell me everything that that code does. Well, I went down chapter and verse, everything that that code did. His face softened a little bit. He said, you realize in all the years I've been with this company, you're the first person that has ever commented on the work that I do as being good? Oh, that made me feel good, but it gave me some valuable information about Jim. Jim needed validation. That's what he needed to get information out of him to come out of his shell. Now you might be thinking, but Rick, isn't this supposed to be about you being a protege and somebody else being the mentor? Sounds like Jim's being the protege at this point. No. I was learning all this time from Jim. That was great information that he gave me just on how to talk to him. Well, Jim was coming up on retirement. And at his retirement function, they asked all of us to come up with a few things that we'd like to tell Jim that he did for us over the years. Well, I came up with a couple of items that I'll share with you that helped me. The first, never lash out at people, especially if you're a supervisor. That came in handy for me when I became a supervisor. I remembered how his supervisor acted with him, and I vowed to never do that. You praise in public, you criticize in private. Keep doing it that way. The second thing that I learned from Jim was to give compliments freely. They're free. Just tell people that they're doing a good job. You don't have to embellish. You don't have to make it up. Just say something to them. Be sincere, and they will appreciate it. Well, as I mentioned, Oprah Winfrey and Mark Zuckerberg and Harry Potter all had their mentors. And I had a mentor too, and his name was Jim Beck. And he taught me which way I should go after I changed my ways. Back to you, Mr. Toastmaster.